Hey, what's up? My name's Cameron and this is Design Based, a channel where I talk about everything design, and today's video is going to be some tips and tricks for getting hired at your dream design job. And I'll stop you right there. You might be wondering why an unemployed 22-year-old is giving you these tips, but I actually have some good reasoning and I think you'll agree. One, I just graduated, so I did pick up some super valuable tips at university and from profs, but more importantly, being unemployed right now, I am actively looking for a job, so that means all sorts of research into these companies, as well as kind of what they do and how to get my best foot forward when applying for them. So one major resource that I found is Tobias van Schneider's How to Get a Job at X series, and that's kind of what this video is focused on synthesizing. So what is it? It's kind of a series where he interviews the top creatives and people in charge of hiring at your dream companies like Airbnb, Shopify, or Pentagram, and from there you can get some really good insight that you'd really only be able to get talking to them otherwise. So I'm just kind of taking this value one step further and making it just a little more accessible to you. So if you only have 10 minutes and want to learn some of the best tips and tricks that these agencies have and kind of what I synthesized and found the most value in, keep watching and let's dive right into that. So what I've done here is kind of divided my notes into three parts, and those are you, your portfolio, and your connection, so how you're reaching out to these businesses. So we're going to start things off with the you section, and this is just kind of some things people like about you as a person, not necessarily always just as a designer, but also just some traits that if you have might be super important, and if you don't, but maybe have been thinking about working on improving on, maybe now is a great time to do those. But without further ado, let's get into them. The first important note that I have here is just to never think that your employer is only going to be interested in the work. Oftentimes they're just as much, if not even more, interested in you as a person, your approach, and everything like that. So don't hide behind your work or don't think it's unprofessional to bring up some personal stuff. It really is important that they get to know you as a person, and that way they can really tell how you fit in with the team and just how you are as a designer. Communication is one of the most sought after traits that these hiring people look for. So this is things like people that like reading and writing, but also people that are really succinct and can just rationalize their ideas well, communicate really well, and overall just give good feedback and work together as a team, because obviously design is a communicative medium and it's not always just through imagery. Having a good grasp on language is super important too. Self-awareness is another trait that designers in this field really value, so being self-aware is really useful for a variety of reasons, but people just like a designer who's like confident but also humble and knows where their design sits and is genuinely doing some good thought and problem solving, rather than just someone who thinks they're really good or kind of goes off on their own lane on their own. Some traits like empathy, humility, openness, and willingness are super important, and other ones that are sought after, and I'm sure you already have a couple of these, so just make sure you show your empathy in design and things like that, and that'll probably put a great foot forward for you, opening up to these designers and making sure you're all on the same page. A quote from Michael Beirut at Pentagram is that I think everyone has the capacity to acquire craft skills, but curiosity and brains are difficult to pick up on the job. And I think this is super important too. You just need to make sure that they know your thought process and that you truly are passionate about design and want to work there for the right reasons. And then it's going to show, and they're really going to like that too. In terms of other passions, almost every employer loves if you have other passions. And this doesn't mean that just because you're at a branding firm you need to know every part of design, but even things like fishing or being into cars can be super beneficial, and just having a passion shows that you can be really into something, helps increase your curiosity, and you never know, there's a good chance it'll even tie into the body of work that you're doing. On that same note, if you're in multiple disciplines of design, it's never going to hurt you. So just because you're in a branding role doesn't mean your UX won't be helpful. Maybe it shouldn't be front and foremost of your portfolio, but it'll probably come up and be useful in the job or the interview. From Brian Collins at Collins, he says that we don't look for particular secondary skills, but we expect everyone to have a second secret superpower. So this is just kind of the succinct way of putting what I said before, that really passion is super important and helps drive people, so everyone should have a passion, and you should really let people see what this is, because if you're passionate about something, others will get excited too. And no matter what, just in general, you should keep challenging yourself, always look to evolve, improve yourself, pick up some new skills, because it's always going to help you, it's going to open new doors, and it does show this growth mindset that a lot of people love, and it works super well. And just a quote to end things off from Elise and Kevin at Shopify, which I think is super important, is that being outspoken in the community is a great way of sharing your knowledge and giving back. So this means that maybe having an online presence, writing some blog articles, making some videos like I'm doing now, things like that can be super useful just to kind of help show your mindset, show your passion, and just kind of tie every part of your life together and really just delve into how important design is to you, and also also a good way of giving back to the community, which is really useful and I love to do. So those are some of the best tips about you and just you as a person, some traits they might be looking for, or some things you might want to focus on when doing it. But really this tags down to a couple personality traits, having some good reading and writing, and just genuinely being passionate and interested in everything you do, and keeping a bit of a humility and humbleness to everything as well. So with these tips, you should be well off towards becoming a great designer and getting hired at a place that you like. So then, moving on to your portfolio and your work, here are some tips about that. We're going to start things off with a quote from Michael Beirut, and that is that the best portfolios are the ones that are comprehensive enough to you that you get a sense of what's going on, but sufficiently open-ended so that you are intrigued by what you see. And I think that's the really important thing about portfolios, is getting a balance between letting your work speak for itself, but also giving it context and kind of showing what you did and why it's important. An important tip about your portfolio is that it should have work that looks like it could be done by the company you're applying for. This doesn't mean you should copy projects from them, copy companies from them or anything, but what it does mean is you are applying to be on their team as a designer, so your style and your work should make sense and kind of feel at home with them. And this is a big thing too, you're not going to want to show every project for every job. Make sure you're tailoring the ones that are really close and in line with the values of that company towards each portfolio. A big mistake you can have is just making one general portfolio with all your work for everything, but that's not really gonna work, and it's probably just gonna hurt you at every possible chance. So alongside that, your portfolio should have your best work, just not everything you've ever designed. And this can be really kind of stressful as a new designer. You don't want to only put 4 projects in, because what if they're not good enough? The thing is, you should be able to choose 4 projects that you know are good enough, that you know are in line with the companies, and that make a lot of sense, that are quite in-depth and you can talk about a lot, and just no matter what, showing detailed work is always going to be better than showing some projects you're not really passionate about. And on that note, you can include irrelevant work, but it's always going to be just that, which is irrelevant. You should definitely tailor and just make sure what you're doing is grabbing the best few projects and the most relevant few, and that's really going to speak a lot to the people you're interviewing. If they see good design, they're going to be happy. Another quote from Elise and Kevin at Shopify is that while a picture is worth 1,000 words, the final result sometimes doesn't fully reflect the depth of your work. So this goes back to the original thing where you really need to find the right balance and definitely make sure you give some context to your work. So one more big tip is make sure you do clearly define what your role was in the project. A lot of people, especially coming out of university, might post some student group projects or things they did part of, but not really clearly define it. And the last thing you want to do is have your employer worried that you're kind of lying about your work or not clearly show what your role was. Also, it is important, if you did do a lot of roles, that you make that clear so they can know that you did the art direction as well as the UI, UX, all the wireframing, everything like that, as opposed to just being one more cog in the machine. So just make sure you define kind of what you did for your project and just give it some more context, and that'll really help it make a lot more sense and help people interpret it and grasp your design from it. A quote from Tobias van Schneider himself is that think of your portfolio as an example of how you approach design, and that just means your portfolio should show kind of what you do for design, how you approach it by ways of process and just some thinking, a bit of rationale, and really someone should be able to look at your portfolio and kind of get a good sense of who you are as a designer. Another important thing is that you don't just need to talk positively about your work in your portfolio. Everyone makes mistakes, and it's important to not kind of hide these or sweep these under the rug. You should definitely embrace the failures and be honest about your work. So from Spotify, Dan said in his interview that it's really the failures that have the most interesting takeaways. It's inevitable that you will have some times in your career where things don't go the way you expected them to, but we want to see how you dealt with them. What did you take away, and what did you do to avoid making these mistakes again in the future? So in other words, mistakes are going to happen to everyone, but it's really important to kind of show off what you did and kind of maybe what you didn't like, what you would do different next time, and just show off how you're learning, and really just that you're quite critical about your designs, but in a good way, and critical in a way that you're always trying to improve. Some big things too that are just kind of generally good tips are to make sure you're getting in the habit of posting and talking about your work. So that's half the reason I started this YouTube channel. I'm not the greatest speaker, but practice makes perfect, and it is an important skill that I want to hone in on. So things like that, posting your work, you should totally be doing now, and if you get in the habit of talking about your work now, get used to critiquing it, it's going to be a lot easier come times like these big job interviews that you're quite nervous about. And if you do have a gap in your portfolio, there are a couple ways you can fill it. A few companies said they don't love if you just do unwarranted rebrands, because that really doesn't show any real world constraints or anything. More importantly, showing things like passion projects and personal work can be hugely important too. So this this is again going to show that you really do care about these things, you're super into them, but also you can have full control, make a project that you want, and obviously you can tailor this project right into the gap that you're trying to fill, and it's just going to be an awesome way to show some passion, add to your portfolio, and just have another real-world design project ready to go. And if you are still worried about posting your work, there's a great quote from someone at Mother LA, and that is that I think if you expose your work online while you're still a young professional and a raw style, it not only shows your talent, but also your tenacity and courage. And I think that's a big thing. You can't start off expecting to be perfect, so the best thing you can do is kind of just start laying these stepping stones to go in the right direction, and eventually you will be better and better. These are some of the best tips about your portfolio, how you can show your work, and what you should talk about, what you should include, and maybe what should stay off of your portfolio. And then last but not least, we're going to go on to a couple tips about connecting. So this is like how you're approaching these companies, how you're getting to know them in the first place, and maybe a couple more things about the job interviews and going beyond the initial contact. First off, it's worth noting that there's definitely no one-size-fits-all strategy, and connecting especially, all sorts of companies do it different ways. So some will almost exclusively headhunt and scout talent, where others love still getting applications, some like seeing students from programs around them. There's just all sorts of different things, and there is no one-size-fits-all, so you should make sure you kind of look into the company that you're applying for and find out what they generally do before moving in. A lot of interviewing is seeing how you fit in with the team, and not just getting to know who you are and how you design. So don't be worried, make sure you are just being yourself, being honest, and just genuinely excited and trying to make these connections. A quote from Marine at Red Antler is that the interview process is about you getting to know us just as much as us getting to know you. So this is important both when meeting the team and everything, but also you should be asking a lot of questions. Just because you're the one being interviewed for the position doesn't mean you don't want to know about the position. Ask all sorts of questions, and your genuine interest will go a long ways as opposed to just keeping your mouth quiet and nodding to everything that they say. This is a big thing that shouldn't have to be said, but it most definitely does, and that is that you should proofread everything. So everything, that means your contact email, your references, your portfolio, just everything you send them should be proofread. This seems like it should be obvious, but it's such an easy way to kill the years of work you've been putting into design and the hours you've been doing making your resume, your portfolio. Just by having a couple typos, your credibility will go out the window, and for a lot of people, just seeing a couple small typos, they'll just throw your application out of the ring, and that's a super frustrating way to lose that opportunity. When you're sending an email, it should be concise, clear, and still have a bit of personality. I think a mistake that I made is just trying to go hyper professional with things, but like I said earlier, people do really want to get to know you and what makes you unique, and having some personality will really help facilitate a better connection. Alongside that, your email should have a clear ask. So it shouldn't just be kind of a random email where you're half inquiring about work. You should be clearly kind of showing your motive and what you're looking for and what you're looking to get back from sending this email. Make sure you're crafting your application for the role you're applying for. So this is the same as portfolios, but it is quite common that you'll have one resume or one reference and you'll just go with that for everything, but that is kind of harmful, and it's really gonna be a barrier to making a genuine connection and seeming like you're genuinely qualified for this company. If you can truly understand who they are and kind of craft your stuff around highlighting your best points and how you guys overlap, that's gonna be a huge thing, as opposed to just having a generic cover letter that everywhere you're applying for gets. Another important thing to note about this email or this first contact can be that it is your first point of contact, so having it clearly written and just all of that will really show the first shining light on how you communicate. So it's even more important that everything's perfect here, just because communication, like we said, is a big thing, and this is going to be their first showcase into how you communicate. From Kate Dill at Airbnb, she says that it's great when we see people reach out directly and express their interest. It shows hustle and passion, and that goes a long way. So even though having some insider knowledge, knowing some people in the company might be useful, in situations like this, just sending an email, even if you find you're unqualified or don't know anyone, can be really important, because that does show just how much you desire it, and it's going to be great for starting a connection. Another important thing to note is, even just by making this connection now, and maybe it'll go nowhere, that is still a connection, so maybe years down the line, things will overlap again, and you'd be surprised just how shaking people's hands will make an impact, and how people you thought were completely irrelevant to your career path might be a star in it just in a couple years down the line. So make sure you're getting to know everyone, being genuinely interested, and things like that, and that'll go a long way in making connections, even if it's not for directly getting a job now. But overall, those were some of the best tips that you can have when you're approaching connecting for your job. Just being succinct, being yourself, and just kind of showing off your communication, why you're interested, and just that you're genuinely into this company. Alright, so there we have it. Those are some of the best tips and the ones I found most valuable about getting your dream job at a dream agency. And the reason these tips are so good is because they're actually coming from the mouths of these people in charge of hiring. So it's not just speculation, these are genuine things that these people are looking out for and things that are genuinely going to give you an advantage and a foot up in the application process. So if you're applying for jobs right now, good luck with that. Don't be too stressed, and it's okay to make mistakes. Just keep throwing out applications, and the more you do, the more you'll learn. And the more you connect with people, the more opportunities you'll have down the line. If you haven't already, make sure you go check out Tobias van Schneider's How to Get a Job at X series. Here you can read the detailed articles and interviews about all of these. So if there's a specific company or two that stands out, you can really learn a lot more about their hiring process. Other than that, have an awesome day, and I hope you go design something great.